Welcome, viewers. This is the second and final part of the series on specific reasons humans always find themselves in an Adam and Eve situation. The earliest period of human existence on this planet, that is, outside the Garden of Eden, was fast, furious, and eventful. Therefore, it was not entirely surprising that happenings in the Adam household did not inspire much confidence as regards the future of mankind. How else could Mr. and Mrs. Adam's first son have become the first murderer in human history? Yes, Cain killed his own brother Abel because he was consumed with envy. Afterwards, the conduct of humans as a whole did not get much better as their excesses continued. In fact, the Almighty could easily have destroyed mankind but for his loving kindness. He graciously continued to keep faith with a fallen humanity. However, this was not before he sank the human race in the flood of Noah, sparing only 8 souls. Shortly after this, he also incinerated the twin cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, cities that have chosen to go their own way by defying the natural way of relations between the sexes. They went their own way. Now, during the era that followed, that is, during each of the eras of man, members of the human race always had the opportunity to choose what was right if they really wanted to. Overall, there have been 3 main eras of humanity. The era of conscience was the first era. This was the period between the fall of man and the giving of the law of Moses. It was the period of natural law stroke conscience. In this era, dispensation or age of conscience, man is possessed of the knowledge of good and evil. Therefore, humans entered into this age with this faculty. Man then chooses between obeying his conscience and doing otherwise. Romans chapter 2 verses 14 and 15 state, when Gentiles who have not that is divine law do instinctively what the law requires. They are a law to themselves, since they do not have the law. They show that the essential requirements of the law are written in their hearts and are operating there, with which their consciences, that is, sense of right and wrong, also bear witness, and their, that is, moral decisions, that is, their arguments of reason, their condemning or approving thoughts will accuse or perhaps defend an excuse that is them. In essence, conscience helps us to hear the voice of God. It helps us to recognize the truth about God and the truth about how we ought to live. This implies that our conscience have been given to us by God, and He considers it so sacred that to violate it is a sin. The second era was the era of the law. This was the period between the time that God gave to Moses the 10 Commandments and the first coming of Christ. It will be recalled that the 10 Commandments and the sacrificial laws were given to Moses on Mount Sinai. You can find this in Exodus chapter 20. The purpose of the law was to teach the Israelites the moral code of the Lord and protect them from their destructive, sinful tendencies. People were expected to live by the law. The third era has been the era of grace. This is the period between the first coming of Christ and the end of time. When Christ came, He lived without committing any sin, according to scriptures. He thus became the only human ever to fulfill completely the demands of the law. Despite this, He still died and thus became the propitiation or atonement for the sins of the world. This is why during the era of grace, a person only needs to believe that Jesus is the Son of God, that He died and was resurrected. Such a person is then considered saved according to scriptures. The book of Romans chapter 10 verse 9 states, because if you acknowledge and confess with your lips that Jesus is Lord, and in your heart believe, that is, adhere to, trust in, and rely on the truth that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. You will have noticed that in each of these eras, God put in place a mechanism by which he could reach humans. The choice, therefore, has always been with humans. They either swim by embracing God's provision for each era, or sink by going their own ways. Therefore, just like in the Garden of Eden, our responses to God's provisions clearly show where our loyalties lie. That is why we can confidently say that every human who has lived on this planet was and is, one way or the other, always was and is in an Adam and Eve situation. Those who lived in the Garden of Eden were deemed to please God if they refrained from eating of the tree of good and evil. Those who lived in the era of conscience were deemed to please God if they obeyed the voices of their consciences. Those who lived in the era of the law were deemed to please God if they obeyed the law and lived by it. Those who are living in the era of grace are deemed to please God if they obey the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of the living God. Those who do otherwise are already condemned according to the inspired word of God. You can now see that no man in any era or age or dispensation had or has any excuse concerning pleasing God, because in each era God made a provision by which he reached humans and presented to them the choices which they had, and by which they could either please or displease God. Therefore, God will be justified when he sits in judgment over humans at the appropriate time. My brothers and sisters, my listeners, my hearers, thank you for coming to the channel again. We have thus come to the end of the series. I pray that God will strengthen you as you continue to believe that Jesus is the only way. I pray that God will strengthen you. Please do not forget to like, share, and comment. Also, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you so much, and God bless you mightily.